Wow, this is fantastic. Do you realize it's been, I think we were just talking about this. We started on this topic of RightPath, actually it was 2NV, almost a year ago. So this is going to be a very exciting evolution to see where things have gone. And good morning, everyone. My name is Guy Mincy. I'm the president of AFCEA Energy. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. I think that we have a very exciting program lined up for you. So with that, today our half-day session is focused exclusively around the RightPath. Now, many of us in this room have heard about it. We've read different articles. We saw it at IMC or some of the context, but we really didn't have the opportunity to go into a deep dive into some of the innovation, and quite frankly, the stakeholders that are driving this haven't really had the opportunity to share some of the newer things that they're doing and the evolution cycle that's going on. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with it, RightPath is a framework that combines the transformative changes of people, processes, and technology to enable the Department of Energy and NNSA to move towards a virtual workforce that will give the employees the ability to work the way that they want, where they want, and at the device of their choice. It also establishes a formal partnership between DOE and NNSA and grants the OCIO authorization to an integrated project team. This team will work to deploy cloud, voice, and network services within the NNSA, a mission area within the department. Today's program will map DOE's multi-phase approach to provide that required technology and infrastructure to align the policy and enable that technology, and then establish a dedicated management attention over a series of years to institutionalize the capabilities across the NNSA infrastructure. Before we get started, though, I'd like to take a few moments to thank our sponsors. Their support enables us to provide effective forums in discussing some of the hottest issues for AFCEA and surrounding the energy community. And without their support, it would be almost impossible to make these things happen. So with that said, our premier breakfast sponsor is HP. Thank you very much. Our gold sponsors include Citrix, Lockheed Martin, and SourceFire. Our silver sponsors are EES, Informatica, and Unisys, as well as SAIC. And then our small business sponsors are Air Patrol, Looking Glass, Planet Technologies, Clarion, and SCI Consulting. And then finally, I'll just give everyone a round of applause. Our lanyard sponsor is Cisco, so thank you very much. And our media partners are 1105 Media and Fierce Government IT. So thank you. One very important note about this is that from an educational perspective, we also have our educational partner, the Graduate School of the USA. AFCEA Energy is pleased to announce that the continuing education units equaling 0.5 will be available for attendees for the graduate school following today's symposium. So, a few last-minute housekeeping items. First, if you wouldn't mind, please turn your ringers off, and if you have buzzers, kill your battery, because the vibration, I'm just kidding. But secondly, you should have received an evaluation packet or an evaluation form in your packet. That enables us, I strongly encourage you and ask you to fill that out because we're developing the ongoing programs for AFCEA Energy, providing the transformation that's there. And it enables us to continue to create programs in a not-for-attribution environment between our federal counterparts and industry partners. So now, it's my pleasure to bring up Jackie Everett, Vice President of Civilian Sales from our premier breakfast sponsor, HP, to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. Please give Jackie a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's my honor and my privilege today to introduce our keynote speaker, and he's an SESer and is currently the Associate Administrator for Information Management and the CIO for the National Nuclear Security Administration under the Department of Energy. He has recently been appointed as the executive for the NNSA transformation and will lead the agency's move to one NNSA. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could give him a warm welcome, Mr. Bob Osborn.
Thanks. Boy, what a nice welcome. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? All right, great. Hey, thanks to AFCEA for putting this on. I really appreciate the opportunity to exchange information with industry partners to let you all know what we're thinking and get your ideas on how we can do it better. AFCEA is a great vehicle for us to do that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in these events. And thank you very much to our sponsors who made it happen. So, without you, we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't have this opportunity, and I wouldn't have this great breakfast, right? So, RightPath, wow. I was talking to Guy out there when I was trying to get a cup of coffee. He wouldn't let me get over there. He kept talking. I know that's surprising to those of you who know him, but and we were talking about, it was August of last year that we had our last event where I introduced the concept of the NNSA network vision and then what we had called inside energy. How many of you were there? Cool, so you remember. Now you're going to hold me to what I said, right? Well, I'm really excited to tell you we far exceeded what I thought we would be able to accomplish in just 10 months. It's really amazing. The team that has come together and has made this happen, both within the government, from our laboratories and plants across the DOE enterprise, and with our industry partners, has allowed us to achieve results that are rarely seen in government in this time frame. We're breaking some glass. We're learning new ways to do things in order to make that happen. But we are making it happen, and you're going to hear a lot about exactly what we've accomplished to date, what we're going to do moving forward, and how you can help us. So that's the intent of this morning. I'm going to give you this one of the great things about being the keynote, right? I get to give you the big overview vision, and then my guys who are really smart get to tell you all the details. So I kind of like that format. So what is RightPath? About July of last year, Mike Lakaitis and I started talking with my team about 2NV in February of last year. And we kind of germinated that and grew that concept. And we recognized that while transformation of the information infrastructure of NNSA was important, the real value was being able to include the entire department in that transformation in order to get the most interoperability is the old word, collaborative capabilities, seamless communication as possible, which is really one of the goals of the Secretary. So we wanted to take that on as well. So I approached Mike Lakaitis and we started talking through what the art of the possible might be. And we came up with this concept of inside energy, which would be NNSA network vision, which we coined 2NV, exported to the rest of the department. But as we started to mature it, we recognized that if we did this right, if we really looked at the architectural framework and the infrastructure that we were going to lay down, this would be a template that would be exportable beyond the department. So we didn't want to limit the title and the concepts to something that was only identifiable to the department. But we believe that this framework that we're going to discuss this morning is really the right path to how you do information transformation in order to set an organization up to truly take advantage of the possibilities that technology is currently giving us to enable a virtual workforce and the organizational transformation that can result from that type of an organizational management approach. So let's go ahead to the first slide. So Mike and I codified our partnership. We created an integrated process team. It's led by Travis Howerton, who's here, and he's going to speak to you this morning. And we put together a charter with sub-IPTs that are led by various members of NNSA and the Department of Energy's OCIO shop in order to show the collaborative capabilities that we have within the department to reach beyond the normal border restrictions of Title 32 and the other cultural barriers to collaboration within the department. We co-signed that document in the fall, and we've moved out on delivery. Since Mike moved on and Bob Rees is the acting CIO, Bob and I re-signed that document last month in order to show that we're still on the right path. Feel free to use that term at any time today when you want to say something is good. It's on the right path, right? But the partnerships are crucial, internal within the department and NNSA, but also between government and industry. And not just government and commercial entities, but within our own M&O contracting community at our laboratories and plants across the department. So we've robbed liberally from the guys who are out there doing, guys and gals who are doing great work for us in the department. And you're going to hear from some of them today as well. But partnerships are key because no one element within an organization has the solution to information transformation in today's complex world. Neither does any agency have all the answers, nor does any one company. So what we're doing is we're putting together a rather complex mosaic of capabilities that allow us to deliver something unique that will then become a template, we hope. Go ahead, next slide. So RightPath is a framework that looks at people, processes, and technologies. We ordered it that way for a reason. Because what we're trying to do here is not just another IT modernization exercise. While that's fairly difficult, particularly in today's fiscal environment, that's not the intent of what we're trying to do. What we want to do is take advantage of all the great technologies that your companies have developed, that you've put in place, and leverage those to actually optimize our people's ability to do their job. And when I say optimize their ability to do their job, I'm not talking about the old way. And we'll talk more about that later in my presentation when we get into the vision for the future. But the people part of it has to be up front, because what we're really all about in IT is enabling people to do their work, to be most effective, and enabling that ability to perform whatever their duty is in support of the organization's mission to achieve the outcome of the organization. So we put that first because it's the hardest part. Change management issues come in, moving people's cheese, right? Job security, threatening my stature and my importance. Do I have to move physically? All of these questions are being dealt with as part of this RightPath initiative. And they're not easy elements of the transformation for us to deal with, but we are doing that. But what we found is, if you're able to articulate a vision and present it in a way that's understandable, people will grab a hold of that for the most part. Not all. Some won't. Some will wait and see, right? If it really works, yeah, I'll get on board. And some will oppose it because they got where they were doing what they're doing and they don't want to change. And you just have to accommodate all those different types of people. But we put people, process, and change, people first, because that's the most important part, and that's ultimately why we're here, is to enable people to do their job. So processes are second. So we're really interested in changing how people can do their work, enabling people to do the work the way they want to work. So this is a really interesting study when you start to look at it. And traditionally, those of us in IT don't really get into the social sciences very much, but you have to. So I'm talking to people who are applied psychologists, industrial psychologists, organizational theorists, in order to come to grips with what does virtual capabilities, the ability to work from anywhere, from any device, what does it really mean to people in doing their work when just doing a job isn't part of our work experience? There's a social aspect. There are many people who enjoy coming into work because that's where their friendship base is. How do you deal with that if now you're going to be a virtual workforce? How do you accommodate the human element, the need for those types of things, which impact their work and their performance. So the processes we're looking at are not merely paving cow paths of how we've always done things, just putting technology on top of it so it's faster, more efficient, we can look at more data, we can present it in dashboards, we can do all that stuff, right? That's not the hard part. Are we going to actually change the organizational structure and the processes of how we allow people to do their work so that we can leverage the technology that's available in a way that the organization can then take advantage of that to be more effective in achieving their mission in the government space and reduce overall costs? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. And last is technology. Certainly not last in importance, but last in difficulty to achieve. There's all the technology we need to accomplish the transformation that we're going to talk about in RightPath that exists today. You all have done that. Parts of everything that we want to do have been more or less delivered in organizations either inside the government or in the private sector. But to do it holistically, particularly in the government space, is really new and difficult. But we're going to do that. But technology is important. We're going to talk a lot about the technology piece because technology becomes the underpinnings, not just the infrastructure and architecture, but the true underpinnings of the transformation. Because if we get the technology right, we then enable the process changes that put people in a position where they can work when they're at their most effective. And that's really what we're trying to achieve in the long run. So let's go to the next slide. I already did that. Go ahead. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking into the future and telling you where we're going to go, because my team is going to tell you where we're at and how we're doing it. My job is to keep unveiling what the next step is so that we all can orient toward what we're trying to achieve. I think that's a critical element that's missing in a lot of transformation strategies. We say, hey, we're going to upgrade our IT. Okay, great. It's going to cost this much, take this long. What are you trying to achieve with that? What's your end state goal? What's the organizational outcome of that transformation? That's not always well articulated, is it? You read a lot of that in RFPs? Probably not. So in order to reach the future, go ahead, we're going to take a little look at the past. So this is where I get to expound a little bit on visionary stuff. My opinion, up until now, really all we've done with our technology is pave cow paths. We've made the way we've always done business really efficient. But we're still doing stuff organizationally the same way we did it 50 years ago, 70 years ago, maybe even 100 years ago. Think about it. The last real societal evolution was when we went from an agrarian economy into an industrial economy, right? So we changed, we adopted the Napoleonic military hierarchical structure into our business organizational structures. One guy at the top, all this tiered down layers of oversight to the people who actually do the work, right? Well, in business, as you all know, the more tiers there are between the person who sets the vision and makes the decisions and the people doing the work is overhead cost, right? Which is a necessary element if you're dealing with paper and you have to get approvals through various organizations by running paper through offices. It made sense to follow the Napoleonic model to have everybody come into one building so the communication could happen to make decisions to make the business work, because you had to be in the same space in order to move the paper around that made the organization function. So we invested heavily in infrastructure that supported that model, that organizational construct. Big buildings, look around this city. DC, the overwhelming percentage of work in DC is knowledge work. I've got a crew looking on what the exact number is. If you don't physically build something, fix something, or deliver something, do you really need to come into an office to do your work today? Probably a little bit, some security things, right? Intel stuff. Most of the knowledge work really is now portable. It's mobile, just like we are. Yet that's not how our organizations are structured, particularly in the government. So we look at the past and look at how we got to where we are. We built these big infrastructures in order to support moving paper around. As we now have done away with the need for paper in a knowledge workforce, we still have the legacy organizational structure. So now we electronically, or if you're in some organizations, I know this will shock you, even though you have an electronic documents management system, it's printed out, gone through manually, and then scanned back into the system. Why is that? Why do you think it is? Because that's the way people want to do it. Because that's the way the organization is set up to do it. Because it's somebody's job to run that paper between the offices just like they did 50 years ago. So that's what I mean when I say paving cow paths. So how do you change that? Well, now you're getting into a societal change. Because I believe the dream of the internet, when it was developed in the 80s and delivered in the 90s, we thought that was going to change society. Has it really? Socially, some, right? Business, a little, depending on how avant-garde your company is. In government, nope. We got email. We got some VTC as a result. That's about it. So when you talk about the next societal revolution that we thought the internet was going to deliver, well, the internet needed some help technologically, right? The rest of the pieces weren't there for the puzzle to enable a virtual workforce. And I'll get more into what I mean by that term in a minute. So as you look at the ability to transform an organization, you have to first get everything right on the technology side. That's where I'm going with this. So when you hear the folks speak later today, you'll understand that's not it. That's the beginning. That's the foundation from which we can move into positioning ourselves to be able to take advantage of what that technology offers us to begin to look at what does work mean today in the knowledge workforce. How do we measure that work? How do we reward that work? How do we aggregate that work in a virtual environment? How do you manage the workforce? What's the role of middle managers, that term, in a virtual work environment of an organization? So all these things have to be addressed. That's why people, process, and technology are important. The technological base now are allowing us to address these issues on how we're going to attack the challenges of a virtual workforce. This is why when I talk about the virtual workforce, I'm not talking about telework. Because what is telework? Paving cow paths. And in many organizations, the people who are allowed to telework are perceived as what? Your least productive workers. You can afford to not have them in the office for a certain percentage of the time. In the government, I'm not speaking for your company. You may have a different perspective. And you're ahead of the government in this realm. Tools are available to allow us to start to make that transformation. So in order to avoid the paving cow paths, we really have to understand what is this virtual workforce of the future, how are we going to manage it, and what outcomes do we desire from it so that we architect the solution correctly. So what you'll see as we talk about 2NV RightPath and the architectural framework that we're putting together is setting the stage for us to then examine these other organizational elements. And you say, okay, why are you doing that, right? CIO of NNSA. Well, I'm also the partner with the Department of Energy. There are significant reductions in overhead cost. Think about it. If you can change how you manage virtual workers in a knowledge work organization and reduce the cost of infrastructure, buildings, heat, power, etc., 40%, across government. What did you just do? Well, you don't, exactly. You don't have to start cutting social programs anymore, do you? Because you figured out a different way to do the work. That's what we're trying to set the stage for. That's the conversation that we want to have with you. That's what's next. Go ahead. So, I talked last year about my constellation of excellence, siloed capabilities that are across the department, where every lab and plant were their own enterprise, very well-defined, well-executed, very mature, and capable. When you start to use the enterprise word from an NNSA or departmental perspective, that all goes away. There's no interoperability, there's very limited collaboration capabilities. We're addressing all that as part of 2NV RightPath. And the cost of doing that is prohibitive to you moving forward in today's constrained budget environments. So what we're looking at now is really the perfect storm for those of us in IT, if we're positioned to take advantage of it. And many of you will say, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to get a contract because there's no money in the government anymore. Well, the problem is we're trying to attack this problem in this environment the way we always have. The way we have to look at it now is an opportunity to show an alternative path that gets us into a services environment that sets the stage for us to reduce the reliance upon everybody coming into these very expensive fixed structures in order to get that cost savings applied to future innovation and transformation. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move from the traditional organizational construct of relationships into a new relationship that allows us to reduce our overall costs in order to reinvest. Now, I just broke one of my rules because I thought it was important to make that point. And I talked about cost first. And I don't do that normally, those of you who have heard me. Because when we embarked upon 2NV, our number one mission was to increase our cybersecurity posture. That was our main goal. In order to do that, we embarked upon the 3 pillars of transformation within the information management transformation strategy that we have. We're talking about 2NV RightPath today. There are 2 other pillars. So 2NV RightPath is modernizing our infrastructure. Everything I've talked about up until now, setting the stage for the knowledge workforce, the virtual workforce of the future. There's also the Joint Cybersecurity Coordination Center, which allows us to understand the health of our information, our systems, and our data within that architecture. And then there's the Cyber Sciences Lab, which is looking at protecting our future. So we put that construct together with the prime purpose of increasing our cybersecurity posture. The second outcome that we were after in our transformation was increasing our collaboration, our ability to reach across the boundaries that I discussed earlier, whether they be Title 32, they be the individual silos of excellence in the constellation of labs and plants between the federal and the M&O, between other agencies, was to erase those boundaries and create a common, collaborative, communication-rich environment, which you're going to hear about later today. The third outcome, was reduced cost. As a result of that, there are efficiencies that will fuel the transformation and move it forward. I wanted to be sure to touch that because I know that you all are as concerned as we are about the budget situation that we find ourselves in, and how are we going to continue to do what we're talking about doing within these constraints. And this is exactly how we're going to do it. But we can't do it the way we've done it before. We have to be innovative, we have to be collaborative, we have to create partnerships. Go ahead. Yeah, that's what we do. Go ahead. So I'm really big on architecture. If you don't get your architecture right, if you don't understand the entire enterprise that you're trying to address in whatever your transformation is, you're going to fall short at some point, and you're not going to achieve your outcomes because you didn't think big enough. So I've challenged in this project Anil Carmel, who you're going to hear later, and Chris, from a security standpoint, to architect this solution with this model, this framework that I discussed at the beginning of my talk, as a template for the government in mind from its very inception, because we believe in order to truly get the economies of scale that we need to generate the resources to continue the transformation, which is of interest to you, we have to have this as scalable as possible and as attractive from a business case to other agencies as possible. And we're doing that. So this is interesting because it only shows my stuff in NNSA. Multiply it by a whole bunch and you have the department. It's depicted this way because the initial pilot of our rollout is the NNSA, and we're targeting what are today that constellation of independent siloed capabilities, both on the federal side office side as well as the M&O and the headquarters. Much of what we're doing in the initial part of that rollout is addressing the federal IT space, which is now the DOCO, the delivery model. And then we're rolling in under our cloud of clouds architectural model, those other elements of the enterprise. And the reason that, if you recall last year, you all remember that cloud of clouds thing? Boy, did that prove to be really a good plan. Because one size doesn't fit all. I said that last year. We recognized that going in, that if we tried to do a monolithic rollout of a single system, we were doomed to failure. First of all, there were, if you count the whole department, like 30 well-defined, well-delivered enterprise IT systems, when you talk about enterprise being a site, that were totally different from each other. So trying to put an enterprise umbrella on that in a single system was just an unachievable goal. So we said, that's not even a good model, let's not go there. So we did the cloud of clouds, where we have a federal cloud, we got all these clouds, and we'll talk about that later. But it allows for the unique business requirements of each element of the organization, but leveraging the common computing infrastructure of your cloud in order to reduce the overhead costs of that IT to the maximum extent possible. And it turns it into a business case for the elements of the organization rather than an IT mandate. That really changes the conversation, and it's carried the day for us within the department, because if you start to have this dictatorial relationship and say, we're going to do one system, this is what we're going to do, you got to give me all your money, and I'm going to manage it for everybody, how well do you think that works? Not very well. You guys, come on, wake up. It doesn't work, right? So we didn't do that. So we're focusing on the Fed cloud now. We're rolling out this capability, and you're going to hear a lot about that and the amazing progress that we've made. And then we're going into the opt-in model, and it becomes a business case. Do you want to sustain managing your entire IT system, or do you want to buy into a virtual enclave within the centralized managed capability? It becomes a compelling argument. Go ahead. So you're going to hear a lot about the three key elements of 2NV RightPath from Travis and Anil. I'm just going to introduce them to you now. So One Voice is a rich communication experience, not unlike a social networking capability that you have in any civilian, any smartphone laying around on the table, right? Facebook, you name it. Twitter, LinkedIn, any of those. And an email, and an ability now to create communities of interest, to change the relationship that you have with people who you need to communicate with, unlike the email system that we have today, although email will remain a component. So One Voice is that collaborative capability that we're presenting, hosted in your cloud, that's going to bring together all the variables of the enterprise in their individual stovepipes without having to mandate that they all adopt the system. Go ahead. Your cloud is the hybrid cloud capability that we're designing, and we're going to host for all of the applications that are enterprise services to be consumed by those throughout the department, and we'll provide enclave. It's just really cool. When Anil gets up here and starts talking about it, I mean, I get excited all over again, and I've heard it a bunch of times. But the concept is let's remove the overhead burden from the different programs within the department and allow them to take advantage of centrally managed and hosted hybrid cloud capabilities that come with an inherited security posture that reduces the startup time of capabilities, reduces the maintenance costs, increases its security posture, and results in a more integrated cyber secure environment than they have doing it on their own. So it becomes that business case once again. This is way cool. It's getting a lot of attention and awards for how it's been designed, and I look forward to you all hearing from Anil on how that happens. Go ahead. One NNSA network is actually the one DOE network now. And basically what we're doing is collapsing many of the networks that we have today. This is the infrastructure transport layer that all this is going to run on. Because clearly, as you all know, as you start to whack a lot of desktop video on top of existing comm lines, you run into problems pretty quickly. We're addressing that from the beginning, just like we're addressing security from the beginning. Go ahead. So sustain it. Not surprising, hearing from the Department of Energy, we're concerned about sustainability as it applies to not just IT. But let's go back to the organizational construct that we were talking about earlier. When you talk about a virtual workforce and the ability to reduce your reliance upon fixed infrastructure, what that means from a sustainability and a green initiative. This is huge. What we have built into our Your Cloud environment is as folks take advantage of however much compute power they need, and you'll see that's all point and click and very smooth and easy to accommodate, there's an instant feedback mechanism on the sustainability points, you will, or credits, that by utilizing this shared environment in a very low power usage architecture, how many homes you could have, you can heat with the power that you avoided. I mean, there's a lot of green credit stuff and how you can account for that. It's very, very cool. Go ahead. One ID. This has been a real problem for the Department of Energy. If you weren't aware, I've got pretty good clearance. I've got a badge that says I'm from headquarters. You think that gets me into any of my own sites across the country? Nope. Everyone's different. Everyone's doing their own thing. It goes back to that constellation of excellent individual rollouts of capabilities, right? Think back to how the Department of Energy was formed. These laboratories were individual entities. And we had a site office sitting at every one with federal oversight. Why did we do that? Because there was no internet, right? There was no communications between sites other than telephone and telegraph. So when these things were designed, it made sense. So everybody did things their own way. And that propagated throughout history, that old paving cow path thing that I talked about earlier. The result is anytime you try to do something enterprise, you run into 30-some different individual sets of requirements that have grown up over time. And the ID card thing is one of the most painful to those of us who have to travel to every site. Literally, at every site, you go through a badging process. How inefficient is that? Where an hour's time of the most senior people in NNSA is spent badging into an organizational element that they own and they're responsible for. Think about that. If you had your corporate vice president come down to one of your local offices, let's say in Reston, and before they could go up to the office and talk to whoever's running that particular office, they had to go through a badging process. How would that work for you? Well, it's not working very good for us either. So we're fixing it. We're partnering with Doug Fremont and the physical security guys, and we're re-architecting that thing. And we're doing it, we're not doing this, willy-nilly, right? There's a specific reason why we're very concerned about security, obviously in NNSA and in other parts of the department. We want to protect that security, and where it's appropriate, we want to make sure it's very strict. But it's not appropriate everywhere. So we're kind of adopting the DoD approach, where one badge will get you into the facility, right? But then you have to have further controls, the more sensitive areas that you need to access. It makes sense, right? So that's what we're doing. Go ahead. So I'm just going to go really quickly through this timeline because you're going to hear a lot more about the details as the guys come up and talk. But, you know, we did the integrated project team I talked about, co-signed by Bob and I. Our project management plan is in. We've begun development of One Voice, and the collaboration side is up. So we've moved very quickly. We're in the process of delivering the entire initial federal transformation within 18 months from when we first drew it up. We're pretty proud of that. That's pretty unheard of in government, in my experience. And the team that you're going to hear from and those who are around the room and back down in Forrestal are responsible for that. I have the great pleasure of just kind of, you know, drawing the big blue arrows, and these guys and gals make it happen, and I have one heck of a good team, along with our industry partners, some of which who are in the room. Matt, go ahead. So with One Voice, we collaborate with ease. Go ahead. Your cloud saves you and us time and money. Go ahead. One NSA allows you to get to your information wherever you want, because one of the underpinnings of what we're doing, and I kind of brushed over it because Travis is going to talk more about it, but mobility is not just the ability to turn in your BlackBerry to use a smartphone or an iPad or some tablet device. What we're talking about is being able to access your information securely from wherever you are, whatever device you happen to have, whenever you want to do that. Because without that underlying architectural infrastructure, you can't move to the virtual workforce concept and what we're going to talk about and what we have named the virtual workforce for the 21st century, vForce 21. So go ahead. What's the value to us? Why am I doing this? So I talked about all these things here, and again, the second bullet should have been the first, but they're all equally important in what we're trying to do. But this is truly an iterative process. It's something that's repeatable, and we're designing it so that other agencies can take advantage of what we've learned in doing this, in building the underpinnings of the architecture that allow you to put the technology in place so that the processes and people elements of the transformation can then be addressed, and the truly beneficial transformation can then take place in a virtual workforce. Go ahead. So, I kind of wrote this up, and some people think it's kind of cheesy, right? We stand on the precipice of a societal revolution. But I believe it. That's the difference. Because we now have in place, and this is a great time to be in IT, gang. All the tools are in place. Now, what are we going to do with them? Well, I think the budget's actually driving us to a good place in looking at alternative solutions and moving the most senior decision makers toward entertaining something that is really out of the box from what their comfort zone says. Because up until now, every one of us have gotten to where we are basically on a modernized version of how people did business in the 50s. That's pretty stunning when you sit back and think about it, because we all think we're so cool and we're advanced in our technology and we can, not really, not really. And if you're a government employee, absolutely not. Think about a day in the life here in DC if you're a government employee and you're a knowledge worker, right? Just like if you were a factory worker, you're expected to get up in the morning, come into a building, clock in, do your work, clock out, and go back home. If you're a factory worker, that makes perfect sense because they need you on the line to put a tire on a car or whatever. So that model works today. It's very appropriate. In our own assembly plants within NNSA, that's an entirely appropriate model. But in a knowledge work organization, why are we doing that? It's because it's the only model we have, right? When we came from that agrarian model into the industrial age and we adopted the Napoleonic hierarchy and we said, okay, we build stuff in this country. Everybody, basically, if they weren't a farmer, they were working in a factory. So you came into the factory to do your work, and you had management tier hierarchy, you had people walking paper around, remember all that? We talked about it. Today in government, most of the people doing work can do that work from anywhere they have internet connectivity. We have all the tools available. We have none of the processes in place, we have none of the policies in place, and we don't understand how to even manage, assess, and reward that work today. You might, in your individual company or your individual department of your company, your government doesn't. That's what we want to address. So we're standing here, I believe, with a real opportunity to look at what might be possible. You know, I'm a taxpayer just like you all. How would I like to see that deficit come down? Because we found a solution to how we could reduce 40% of the infrastructure costs of government in Washington, D.C. That's fairly compelling. It's not outside the realms of possibility because we have the tools to do it today. The question is, do we have the will to do it? Go ahead. So imagine a virtual workforce. Thanks to the team. I just want to finish with one thought, kind of to tease you with on, okay, that's all kind of cool and out there. Why is it really important? So I want to talk about two particular case studies, if you will, of why understanding why a virtual workforce is not telework and why it should be important to you as a company and us as a government. And the first is the way succession planning is done, right? So the government, succession planning isn't done, but where we try, it's done poorly. And it's mainly done because we have either close organizational contact with a few people who we get to know what their abilities and their skills are, and then we groom them up and we put them in various different jobs so that they can achieve higher positions, and that's our succession planning. Perhaps in industry you have a little bit more formal process. The problem with that is you only really have the visibility of the people who you know personally and you interact with. What we see if you go to a virtual workforce and you automate capabilities to understand individual contribution to a team contribution to an organization, and that organization's achievements of its mission, and you understand the role of that person in each of those elements, now you have an actual metric and measurable on everyone who you can see who truly is performing at what level in your organization. The other part of it, and I know none of you have ever experienced this, is you're contributing a great deal to a project like RightPath. And it's presented up to your most senior board for approval. And the question's asked, whose idea was this? And whoever's presenting it, which is like 3 tiers above you who started the whole idea, right, says, it's mine, my idea. I know that never happens to you or has ever happened to you, but what's the real outcome and the problem with that happening? Well, the first thing is the senior people who hear that then have a misconception of the skills and abilities of the person who just took credit for that work. And they probably will put them in a senior position for which they're not really qualified, potentially damaging the ability of the organization to function at its highest level. The other part is the person who made that decision doesn't know anything about the person who really has the skill and abilities because there's no visibility of that. One other part of it that is really important, and I know none of you ever experience this, is your best workers oftentimes are hidden. And they're hidden by And I'm not using middle management necessarily negatively, but it's just a fact of life. If you've got somebody who's really hot working for you, you want to keep them, right? And if your organization is performing really well because of that person, you don't want them to advance and leave your organization because then your performance will go down. You're really concerned about that. That happens today. So the people who you really want to advance in your organization, you have no visibility of what they're really contributing. In a virtual workforce environment where you have the opportunity to apply those tools, you get to see who's really doing the work. That person is rewarded for their work. Their value rises to the top, and your organization functions much more effectively in achieving whatever it is, the profit, the mission of the government as an outcome. So those things are real societal issues that we're going to be talking about and looking at as we move forward. That's it. Any questions? Do I have time for questions?